The story begins on the alien planet Drathios, a world filled with tall crystal mountains, burning rivers, and skies that changed color every hour. The planet was home to the dragon folk, a proud and powerful race with scales as strong as metal and fire inside their chests. At the center of this world stood the grand palace of flames, where the royal family lived. But inside that giant palace was a secret fear that no one talked about aloud. The dragon prince Karin could not control his rage, and no one could make him smile, not even once in his entire life. People whispered about him behind closed doors. They said his temper was dangerous. They said his fire was too strong. They said even the royal guards were scared of him. When he was a child, his anger broke training grounds, shattered stone walls, and set the sky on fire more than once. As he grew older, his power grew with him. But his control did not. Every mistake, every frustration, every small emotion turned into heat. Smoke and flames, the advisors tried to guide him, but he rejected them. The healers tried calming medicines, but they failed. Even the king and queen worried silently, wondering if their son would one day burn the entire kingdom. On the morning the story truly begins, the great hall was full of tension. The king had called for a meeting of his generals, hoping to plan defenses against the Void Empire, a distant enemy. But the moment the prince entered the hall, everyone felt the air tighten. Karin's steps were slow and heavy, and small sparks crackled from his nostrils as he breathed. One wrong word could bring a storm. Everyone knew that, so everyone stayed silent. But silence was not enough. One general made a small mistake. He dropped a metal plate of maps. The loud clatter echoed through the hall. The prince froze, his tail twitched, his jaw tensed. His eyes glowed bright orange, the heat rose around him. The stone floor started to crack beneath his feet. Everyone stepped back in fear. Sweat trickled down faces. Soldiers held their shields tight. The king lifted his hand to stop his son. But the prince could not hear anything, not warnings, not voices, nothing but the growing fire inside him. Suddenly flames burst out, shooting across the hall. Tapestries burned, metal melted, and pillars shook. Some soldiers ran to protect the king, some ran to save themselves. Everyone feared the same thing. This might be the day the prince lost control completely. This might be the day everything turned into ash. Even the queen covered her mouth, trembling as she watched her son roar in pain and frustration. His rage was not wild violence, it was suffering. But no one knew how to calm him. No one had ever succeeded in the middle of the chaos. When smoke covered the room and everyone prepared for disaster, a single door opened at the back of the hall. A human stepped inside, walking with slow, steady steps. He wore a plain cleaning uniform and held nothing but a mop and a small bucket. His name was Mark, a simple janitor sent from Earth as part of a work exchange program. While everyone else panicked, Mark looked around with confusion. He had no idea what had happened. He had just come to clean the hall. The soldiers shouted at him to run. They waved frantically, pointing at the prince, but Mark did not run. He blinked, tilted his head, and whispered to himself, "Why is everyone screaming?" Then he saw the dragon prince towering above everyone, fire leaking from his mouth like smoke from a volcano. Mark should have been terrified. Any normal person would have been. But for some strange reason, he was not. Instead, he stepped forward. Everyone froze. The king shouted for the guards to pull Mark back, but the sound was drowned by the prince's roaring. Heat rushed across the room like a burning wind. Mark's uniform fluttered, but he didn't step back. He stared at the prince calmly, as if he was looking at someone who needed help, not someone about to explode. Slowly, carefully, Mark lifted one hand and waved, not with fear, but with a small smile, a confused smile, the kind you'd give a child who is crying loudly in a supermarket. "Hey," Mark said softly. "Are you okay, big guy?" The entire hall went silent. No one had ever spoken to the prince like that, not softly, not casually, not without shaking. The prince turned his head sharply toward the human. His eyes narrowed, fire building, but Mark didn't move. He simply pointed at the giant scorch marks on the floor and said, "Listen, if you burn the whole palace, I'll have to clean all of it, and honestly, I don't get paid enough for that." There was a tiny sound, almost too small to notice. A small puff of smoke escaped the prince's nostrils. Not angry, fire-confused smoke. Mark took a step closer. Everyone gasped. The prince stared at him, his anger pausing for the first time. Mark raised his eyebrows and added, "You know, if you want to scream, scream. But maybe don't melt the mop. I need this." Another puff of smoke. This time softer, warmer, and then the fire stopped. The dragon prince did not smile. Not yet, but something changed. Something no one had ever seen before. He listened, he calmed. And the entire kingdom would never forget that moment. After that strange moment in the great hall, the palace was filled with questions, whispers, and disbelief. Everyone kept repeating the same thing again and again. Did a simple human janitor stop the dragon prince's rage when the strongest warriors, wisest healers, and royal advisors had failed for years? No one understood it, not even the king. But one thing was clear to everyone. The human named Mark was not ordinary. He had seen something in the dragon prince that no one else had ever noticed. And that small spark of understanding changed everything. After the flames died and the danger passed, Mark simply stood there holding his mop. Looking at the huge scorch marks around him, he sighed and muttered, "This is going to take forever to clean." Some guards looked at him like he was insane. Others admired his courage. The queen covered her mouth, trying not to cry, partly from shock and partly from relief. The prince, on the other hand, stared at Mark with an expression no one had ever seen on his face before. It was not anger, not hate, not frustration. It was confusion, deep confusion. As if he were asking himself, who is this small creature? And why didn't he run? The king walked toward Mark, his steps slow and heavy, as if he carried the entire kingdom's worries on his shoulders. "Human," he said, "how did you do that?" Mark blinked. "Do what?" The king pointed at the prince, who still looked surprised. "That," Mark shrugged lightly. He wasn't angry, he was hurting. "So I talked to him like someone who needs a friend." The hall fell into stunned silence. No one had ever used the word friend and dragon prince in the same sentence before. Mark didn't understand why this shocked them so much. To him it felt simple. When someone screams, maybe they're scared, not dangerous. The king made a decision that surprised everyone. He ordered that Mark be assigned to the prince. "At least for some time, stay near him," the king said gently. "If you can calm him, then perhaps you can help him learn control." Mark wasn't sure if that was a good idea. He wanted to clean floors, not babysit a fire-breathing royal teenager. He scratched his head and said, "Do I get extra pay for this?" The king didn't know how to answer that, but the queen let out a soft laugh after years of not laughing at all. Even that tiny moment of humor felt like sunlight in a dark place. From that day on, Mark followed the prince everywhere. At first, Karen walked fast, keeping distance, pretending the human was not there. He didn't know how to feel about someone who wasn't afraid of him. Most people bowed, trembled, or avoided eye contact when he passed, but Mark, he treated him like any normal person, one moment complaining about the heavy mop he carried, the next moment humming a tune as he followed the prince down the long palace hallways. Eventually, Corinne turned his head slightly and asked in a low rumble, "Why do you walk behind me like a shadow?" Mark smiled, "Because your shadow is cooler than mine." That was when it happened. A tiny gust of warm air escaped the prince's nose. Not fire this time, something softer. Almost like a soft exhale of surprise. It wasn't a laugh, not yet. But it was a step closer, Mark noticed, but he didn't say anything. He didn't want to scare the moment away. The palace staff observed them from a distance, hoping, praying that Mark could do what no one else could. The prince's rage had been a danger for years. If someone could finally teach him control, the entire planet would be safer. Still, it wasn't easy at first. The prince had spent his whole life being treated like a weapon, a symbol, or a threat. Nobody treated him normally. Mark was the first one who talked to him like a real person. And Karen didn't know how to handle that. He didn't know whether to be defensive or curious, but he kept listening. As days passed, Mark started noticing small details others had missed. When the prince grew angry, his wings twitched slightly before the flames rose. His tail curled tight when he was nervous. His claws tapped the floor rhythmically when he felt lonely. These signs were not signs of a monster. They were signs of a young man who never learned how to process emotions. And Mark, being human, understood emotions far better than any warrior or advisor in the palace. One evening, Mark found the prince alone on a high balcony. Staring at the burning horizon, his scales shimmered with a mix of gold and crimson as the sunset reflected across his body. Mark walked slowly and stood beside him. "Long day?" he asked. Karen didn't answer at first, but after a moment he spoke. "Why do you speak to me like I am normal?" Mark laughed lightly. "Because you are. You're just big, loud, fiery, and terrifying sometimes. But other than that, pretty normal." The prince turned toward him with a surprised expression. "No one had ever described him like that," Mark added. "Everyone sees your fire, but no one sees the person inside." The prince's chest tightened. His fire went quiet. He didn't know why those simple words touched him so deeply. Nobody had ever said anything like that to him. Not once in his entire life. From that moment, something shifted between them. Karen didn't fully trust Mark yet. But he no longer avoided him. He didn't glare at him, didn't roar at him. Instead, he listened. And Mark began sharing small human stories from Earth. Stories of kids arguing, families laughing, people teasing each other, things so normal and simple that the prince found them strange and fascinating. Sometimes he would ask questions. Sometimes he would simply sit silently beside the human, absorbing every word. But while this bond slowly formed, dark eyes watched them from the shadows. The Void Empire, enemies of Drathios, had spies who noticed something unusual. They saw that the Dragon Prince was changing, calming, becoming more controlled. And they feared what a controlled Dragon Prince could mean. So they prepared a plan to break his mind again. A plan to use his rage against his own kingdom, and soon their attack would begin. Days passed quietly in the palace. But something inside the Dragon Prince had started to change. His fire no longer exploded without warning. His anger no longer controlled him completely. It was as if the human janitor's strange presence had pushed aside a heavy weight he had carried all his life. But the truth behind the prince's rage was still hidden. Even he did not fully understand it, and Mark, with his simple words and patient eyes, was about to uncover something the entire kingdom had missed for years. One morning, the palace was unusually silent. Servants moved softly, guards spoke in low voices, as if afraid to disturb something delicate. Mark walked through the long hallways carrying his cleaning tools, humming to himself. He eventually found the prince sitting alone in the training courtyard. The giant practice stones around him were shattered into pieces, signs of another rage episode from earlier that morning. But this time it looked different. The stones weren't melted or burned. They were cracked in clean lines, as if Karen had struck them with controlled force instead of wild fury. Mark approached carefully. "Rough morning?" he asked. Karen didn't answer. He just stared at his claws, his wings drooping slightly. He looked less like a powerful royal and more like a confused, tired young man who didn't know how to deal with his own heart. Mark sat beside him, not too close, not too far, just enough to show he was there. Corinne finally spoke in a low voice. I dreamed again. His tone was heavy. The same dream. Mark looked at him. What dream? The prince took a long breath before answering. I'm alone, in a burning field. Everyone around me is gone. I hear voices calling me a danger, a threat. A mistake. He closed his eyes. When I wake up, the fire inside me is already awake. Mark didn't speak immediately. He wanted Corinne to continue, and he did, when I was small. The others kept their distance. The hatchlings played together, but when I approached, their parents pulled them away. His voice trembled. I thought I was cursed. Mark's heart tightened. He understood now. The prince wasn't dangerous because he wanted to be. He was dangerous because he had been raised in fear and isolation. No warmth, no laughter, no comfort, just pressure and expectations. A child grown in silence becomes a storm. And Corinne had become a storm with fire in his chest, Mark said softly. You were lonely. Corinne looked at him with surprise. The word felt strange. He had been called many things powerful. Deadly, uncontrollable, but never lonely. No one had ever dared touch that truth, but Mark's simple words hit deeper than any official speech or royal advice. For a moment, Corinne's fire flickered like a candle trying to stay alive. He whispered, Yes. I think I was. Mark placed his cleaning cloth on the ground and leaned back. You know, humans also get angry when they're lonely or ignored. Corinne frowned. Humans do not breathe fire. Mark laughed loudly. No, but some yell like they do. Corinne blinked. Confused, but Mark could see he was listening. Really listening. Anger is just sadness wearing armor, Mark continued. You're not a monster. You're someone who never got a chance to be understood. For a few seconds, the world felt still, even the wind softened, as if it didn't want to interrupt this moment. But the peace did not last long. Hidden in the shadows of the palace towers, agents of the Void Empire watched every movement. They had come to Drathios months earlier, searching for weakness. They discovered a terrifying truth. The most powerful force in the kingdom was unstable. A weapon of rage, so they planned to use that rage to destroy the royal family from within. But something had ruined their strategy. A human, a simple janitor, had stepped into the prince's life and begun calming him, making him stronger, more stable, more dangerous to them, their leader. A tall figure made of shifting shadows whispered to his team, The prince is changing. We must act before the human weakens our advantage. Trigger his rage again. Trigger it so fiercely that he loses control completely. Mark had no idea danger was growing so close. He was in the courtyard with the prince. Trying to lighten the mood, he picked up a small stone, tossed it in the air, and said, Want to see a human trick? Corinne raised one brow ridge. Trick? Mark nodded proudly. Watch. He tried to spin the stone on his finger like a coin, but it slipped and hit his own forehead. Ow, he muttered. Corinne made a sound. A soft, confused, warm sound, almost like a breath mixed with amusement. Mark rubbed his forehead. Okay, that did not go as planned. Corinne looked away quickly. But Mark caught the tiny curl at the corner of his mouth. Was that almost a smile? Mark teased. Corinne growled lightly, which only made Mark grin even more. Their bond was growing, one strange moment at a time. But then the air changed. A sharp hiss echoed through the courtyard. Corinne's ears twitched. Mark looked up, confused, and then it happened. A hidden device activated above them, a Void Empire sonic weapon. Its sound was invisible to humans, but to dragons, it was agony. Corinne clutched his head. Roaring in pain, his wings flared wide. Fire burst from his chest uncontrollably. The ground cracked beneath him. Mark stood quickly, worry filling his eyes. Corinne? Corinne, look at me. But the prince couldn't hear him. The sound cut into his senses like a blade. His rage awakened again, stronger than before. The spies watched from the shadows, smiling. Their plan was working. The Dragon Prince was slipping back into the monster they needed him to become. And Mark was the only one who could stop what was coming next. Before the kingdom burned again, the courtyard shook as the Dragon Prince roared in agony. His wings snapped open with such force that dust and broken stones flew across the yard like a storm. The strange sonic weapon hidden above them continued humming, releasing a sound too sharp for human ears to detect, but for Corinne, it was torture. Every beat of the sound dug into his mind like claws scraping against bone. Mark felt the ground tremble under his feet and took a step back, not in fear, but in shock. He had seen the prince angry before, but never like this. Never with such raw pain in his eyes. "Corinne! Hey, look at me!" Mark shouted louder, but the prince couldn't hear anything. His pupils had shrunk into tiny glowing dots. His chest heaved with burning breath. Bright flames flickering between his teeth. The courtyard walls reflected the heat. And cracks spread under Corinne's claws as he struggled to stay in control. But control was slipping away fast. Mark knew what that meant. If Corinne lost himself completely, the palace would be destroyed, the city might burn. And the Void Empire spies watching from the shadows would get exactly what they wanted. Mark looked around quickly, searching for the cause of the prince's sudden pain. Something triggered him, he whispered to himself. Something's hurting him. He scanned the towers, the rooftops, the sky, and then he saw a small, almost invisible device glowing faintly above the archway. It was stuck to the stone like a parasite. Vibrating gently, Mark didn't know what it was. But he knew one thing, it needed to be destroyed. Now, not later, before he could move. Corinne roared again, louder this time. The sound shook the palace windows, servants screamed and ran for safety. Guards scrambled to protect the inner halls. Some even raised their shields, thinking a monster had awakened. But Mark understood the truth. It wasn't a monster, it was a boy in pain. A prince who was being attacked by something designed to break him completely. Mark gripped his mop like a weapon. Which was ridiculous, but he had nothing else. Okay. Calm down, Mark, you can do this, he muttered to himself. He sprinted toward the archway, but the heat coming from Corinne's fire was so strong, it pushed him back like a giant hand. His skin felt like it was burning. His eyes watered, the mop's handle grew hot. But he didn't stop. He shielded his face with one arm and pushed through the burning air, step by step. Behind him, Corinne's rage exploded into a wild burst of flame that shot into the sky. Turning clouds into glowing embers, Mark didn't dare look back. He needed to reach that device. He stumbled forward, climbed the cracked pillar, and reached up with his mop. He swung hard. The mop head slapped against the device and sent it flying off the wall. It hit the ground and cracked open, releasing a small spark before dying out. The courtyard instantly grew quieter. The prince's roar stopped mid-echo. The flames dimmed for a moment, but Corinne didn't fall calm. Not yet. The damage was done. The pain still burned inside his mind. His wings folded in tightly. His breathing turned heavy. And steam rose from his body. Mark dropped down from the pillar and ran straight toward him. "Corinne! Listen to me. You're okay. It's gone. It's gone." He shouted, but Karen's eyes didn't recognize him anymore. The sound had awakened something deeper, something darker, the old memories. The childhood nightmares, the loneliness. All the fear others had planted in him, they all rushed up at once. He roared again, this time with pain and fear mixing together. And his fire erupted toward Mark without warning. Mark jumped aside just as a column of flame blasted past him. Scorching the ground, he rolled across the dirt. Coughing and scrambled back up, his uniform was singed. His mop was gone, burned to ash, but he still didn't run. "Corinne! It's me, you're not alone. You're not what they want you to be." Mark yelled with every bit of breath he had left. Karen dropped to his knees, his claws digging into the stones as he battled himself. His wings hit the ground with such force that dust clouds filled the air. Mark could barely see anything, but he knew he couldn't let the prince lose control again. Not now, not when he had come so far. He stepped forward slowly, hands raised, voice steady. "Hey, big guy. I know it hurts, but I'm here. You're not alone. Just breathe, okay? Just breathe with me." The spies watched with growing frustration. Their plan was supposed to break the prince beyond repair. But the human was getting in the way again. One of them whispered angrily, "If the prince comes, all our work is ruined." But they couldn't get closer without being seen. So they waited, hoping the fire would finish Mark before Corinne found clarity. Mark kept moving closer, ignoring the tremors shaking the ground. He placed one foot in front of the other, steady and slow. "Corinne, look at me," he said softly. "Please, look at me." The prince's growling breath shook the air, but he raised his head, his glowing eyes flicking toward the human, like a confused animal caught between instinct and trust. "You know me," Mark whispered. "You know my voice. I talk too much, remember?" Corinne blinked, still trembling. Mark took another step. "It's okay to be scared. It's okay to feel pain. You don't have to hold it alone." The prince's claws loosened slightly. The fire around him dimmed a little. Mark reached out his hand slowly, inch by inch. "I'm right here, Corinne. I'm not going anywhere." For a moment, the courtyard fell into silence. The wind stopped, the birds stopped. Even the distant palace bells seemed to pause. Corinne stared at Mark, his breath slowing, his fire settling. Something inside him recognized this human, the one who didn't run, the one who saw him, the one who stayed. But the danger wasn't over, far from it, because the Void Empire spies had another plan ready, and the next attack would not target the prince. It would target Mark. Mark stood only a few steps from the Dragon Prince, his hand stretched toward the massive creature, whose chest still glowed with unspent fire. Corinne trembled, breathing unevenly, his wings twitching as if deciding whether to attack or collapse. The courtyard looked like the aftermath of a small war-cracked stones. Smoke rising from the ground and scorch marks everywhere. But Mark didn't care about any of that. He cared only about the boy trapped inside the fire. "Just breathe, big guy," Mark whispered again. "You're fighting it. I can see you fighting it." For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Corinne's claws loosened a little more. His fire quieted until it was only a faint glow under his scales. His breath slowed, deep and heavy. Mark felt the heat settle like a dying storm. He didn't step any closer, not yet. He didn't want to startle him. Instead, he spoke gently, the same way someone might speak to a scared child hiding under a blanket. "You're not a monster," Mark said softly. "You're not what they think you are. You're someone who was hurt." That simple truth cut through Corinne's confusion like a beam of light. His eyes flickered, the orange glow softening. Something warm, something human. Returned to his gaze, Mark saw it: recognition. Trust, fear, all mixed together. Corinne was fighting. Truly fighting, not against Mark, but against the darkness in his own mind. But they were not alone, up in the shadows of the palace towers. The Void Empire spies watched in growing anger. Their device had failed. The prince was supposed to lose control completely, destroying everything, including himself. But the human kept interfering. The leader hissed in frustration. "Enough," he whispered. "If we cannot break the prince, we will break the human holding him together." He nodded to his partner, who pulled out a small black dart, coated with a venom that caused instant paralysis. They aimed it at Mark, quietly, efficiently, without hesitation. If the human fell, the prince's emotional balance would shatter instantly, and the rage would return worse than before. It was a cruel plan. But the Void Empire never cared for fairness. They cared only for destruction. Mark had no idea danger hovered above him. He took one slow step closer to Corinne. Lowering his voice, "Let's get you up, okay?" Nice and easy. Corinne's breathing steadied even more. His fire shrank, he blinked again, and for the very first time since Mark met him, the prince looked tired, not furious, not angry, not dangerous, just tired, tired in his heart. He whispered in a shaking voice, "I don't want to be like this." Mark felt something tighten inside his chest. He whispered back, "Then don't face it alone." The prince lowered his head slightly, almost like a bow, and that was when the dart flew. Fast, silent, deadly. It shot through the air straight toward Mark's neck. The spies waited for the victory, waited to see the human collapse, but they made one terrible mistake. They forgot the dragon prince was still half aware of everything happening around him. Corinne sensed the danger first. His pupils narrowed. His wings snapped open in a sharp, defensive reflex, and with a burst of strength, he swung his tail through the air. The dart bounced off a scale and clattered to the ground harmlessly. Mark didn't even realize he had been seconds away from dying. But Corinne did. His eyes widened with sudden fear, not fear of the spies, but fear of losing the only friend he had ever known. Mark noticed his reaction. What happened?" he asked, but Corinne didn't answer him. Instead, he moved quickly, shielding Mark with his huge body. The spies cursed under their breath and disappeared into the shadows before the guards arrived. Mark blinked up at the prince, confused. "Hey, what are you doing?" he asked. Corinne lowered his head, his voice deep but trembling. "Someone tried to harm you." Mark's heart skipped. "Harm me? But why?" Corinne looked away, flames flickering under his throat. "Because you make me stronger." Those 5 simple words shook Mark harder than any fire blast could. He didn't know what to say. Corinne continued, "They fear what I can become if I learn control. They fear what your presence is doing to me." Mark took a slow breath, processing everything. "So, I'm basically your emotional fire extinguisher?" he said, trying to lighten the mood. Corinne's throat let out a soft puff of warm air, almost like a quiet laugh trying to escape. Mark smiled. "Hey, I'll take it. I'd rather be a fire extinguisher than ash." Corinne blinked slowly. "You are strange." Mark grinned wider. "Thank you." But the moment of calm didn't last long. More guards rushed into the courtyard, seeing the damage, the burns, and the prince towering over the human. They immediately assumed the worst. "Protect the human," one shouted, raising his weapon. Corinne's eyes widened in fear of hurting Mark, fear of being blamed again, fear of losing control under pressure again, before anyone could act. Mark stepped forward and raised his hands. "Stop!" he shouted. "He didn't hurt me. He saved me." The guards froze in confusion. Corinne stared at Mark with shock. He wasn't used to anyone defending him, not ever, not once in his entire life. Mark pointed at the cracked device on the ground. "Someone else did this. Someone attacked him." The guards inspected it and exchanged worried glances. They realized something terrible in infiltration. An assassination attempt, a hidden enemy. This was no accident. Corinne slowly lowered his wings, breathing shakily. Mark placed a hand gently on his huge scaled arm. "You're okay, big guy. I'm still here." The prince swallowed, the glow in his throat fading. His voice was quiet, almost fragile. "I thought I almost..." Mark nodded. "Yeah, I know, but you fought it. You protected me instead of losing yourself. That's not anger, Corinne. That's control." And for the first time in his life, the dragon prince felt something warm inside his chest that wasn't fire. It was pride. It was trust. It was the beginning of a new strength. A strength the Void Empire feared more than anything. But Corinne didn't know yet that the Void Empire had already prepared their next move, and this time, it wouldn't be a hidden weapon, it would be an invasion. The quiet courtyard did not stay quiet for long. Word of the attack spread through the palace like wildfire. Servants whispered, guards ran in every direction, and commanders demanded answers, but Mark stayed beside Corinne, refusing to leave him even when more soldiers arrived with fearful eyes. The prince stood tall, but inside he was shaken. Something had awakened in him that he didn't understand: fear. Not for himself, but for Mark, and that fear had changed him. Inside the palace war room, the king faced urgently gathered generals. The air was tense. Karen stood behind Mark, wings folded tightly, his eyes sharper than ever. His fire was quiet, controlled, glowing softly under his scales. Mark stood with shoulders straight, though he still smelled faintly of smoke. The king looked at him first. Human. You protected the prince. Mark shrugged a little. He protected me too. The king exchanged a worried glance with the queen, then turned back to them. We found the remains of a Void Empire device in the courtyard. This means only one thing. He paused, his deep voice tightening. The invasion has begun. They are no longer hiding, the generals gasped. Some whispered panicked words, but Corinne stepped forward, the flames in his throat pulsing with rising determination. Father, let me fight. The generals froze. The prince rarely volunteered for anything except training, and even then, he was too unstable to join the battlefield. But now something about him seemed different, more focused, more grounded, more human in his clarity. The king studied him with worried eyes. Son, you lost control today. Corinne lowered his head slightly. Yes, but I regained it. He looked at Mark, his voice steady. Because I was not alone. Mark scratched the back of his head. Embarrassed. I did shout a lot. Corinne ignored the humor and continued. If the Void Empire is here, I must stand for our people. The generals murmured uncertainly. Some feared releasing the prince into battle could be more dangerous than the enemy itself. But Mark stepped forward with unexpected courage. With respect, Your Majesty, Mark said. He's not the same Corinne you remember. Corinne frowned slightly. What do you mean? Mark gestured at him. Look at him. He's calmer, clearer. He thinks before reacting now. A general scoffed. Because of you? A janitor? Mark shrugged. Well, yeah. The queen hid a smile behind her hand. Corinne's tail twitched in mild amusement. But their moment was cut short by a sudden tremor that shook the palace floor. Dust rained from the ceiling. The lights flickered. A low, distant boom echoed through the mountains outside. The king's face paled. They're here, he whispered. Another explosion followed, closer this time, followed by terrified screams from the city below. The generals ran to the balcony. Corinne and Mark followed closely. And what they saw stole the breath from every living creature in the palace. Hundreds of dark Void Empire ships pierced the sky like black knives. Their engines hummed with sickening, unnatural energy. Beams of violet light shot toward the ground, striking buildings, roads, and walls. The peaceful city of Drathios erupted into chaos. Families fled through the streets. Soldiers scrambled to defense lines. Horns blared across the kingdom. The shadowy invaders spilled out like swarms of insects. Strange masked figures wielding weapons that hissed and crackled with deadly power. Mark's heart raced. This is bad. Really bad, he whispered. Corinne's fire flared brighter. But not out of anger, out of purpose. He stepped forward, eyes burning with fierce protection. I will not let them harm my people. The king placed a hand on his son's arm. Corinne, please, be careful. For the first time in years. The prince looked into his father's eyes with complete clarity. I will, he said softly. I finally have something to fight for. The doors burst open as guards ran inside shouting. The enemy is approaching the palace gates. Corinne turned to Mark. Stay inside, human. It is too dangerous. Mark crossed his arms. No chance, I'm coming, Corinne frowned. You cannot fight. True, Mark said. But you listen to me. And I'm not letting you go out there alone. Not after everything we've been through, Corinne stared at him. Stunned for a moment, then gave the smallest nod. Very well. Stay close to me. The two stepped outside together. A swirling storm of smoke and fire greeted them. Soldiers clashed with void invaders. Explosions shook the stone pathways. The air tasted like ash and electricity. Corinne inhaled deeply, his chest glowing brighter and brighter until he released a massive wave of fire, not wild, not uncontrollable, but sharp and focused. The flames exploded across the battlefield, knocking enemies back but leaving allies untouched. The soldiers gasped in amazement. The prince. He's controlling it, they whispered in disbelief. Corinne moved with precision, using his wings like shields, deflecting blasts, shielding civilians, fighting like a true warrior prince. Not a raging storm, Mark stayed behind him, warning him whenever someone approached from the side, pointing out danger, shouting helpful tips. Left. Two coming from the left. Know your other left. Corinne growled but followed the directions perfectly, sending enemies flying with tail strikes and bursts of controlled flame. The void invaders quickly realized their plan had failed. The prince was not unstable, not broken, not weak. He was stronger than before. And worse, he had a human by his side calming him with nothing but words. The spies watching from the shadows trembled with fear. This is impossible, one hissed. He should have destroyed everything. Another glared at Mark with hatred. It's that human. He has changed the prince. He makes him dangerous. But the leader only whispered, then remove the human, and the prince will fall, while Corinne fought fiercely on the front lines. A shadow moved behind them, a new threat forming. The Void Empire had one last weapon, one they had been saving for a moment exactly like this, and Mark was their target. The battlefield was chaos. But for the first time in his life, Corinne moved through it with complete focus. Fire burned under his scales like a second heartbeat, but he controlled it, shaped it, guided it. His wings cut through the smoke like blades of gold. Every time he struck, enemies fell. Every time he breathed fire, the flames obeyed him instead of exploding wildly. Soldiers stared with wide eyes as he protected them, shielded them, fought beside them. Not as a danger, but as their prince, and right behind him was Mark. Small compared to the towering dragons and monstrous void soldiers, but brave in a way no one else could ever match. He dodged blasts, shouted warnings, pulled wounded soldiers out of danger, and kept his eyes on Corinne, yelling, "You're doing great. Don't stop. Keep breathing." It was ridiculous. It was brave, it was human, and it worked. But high above the ruined palace walls, the Void Empire leader watched silently. His body made of shifting shadows, eyes glowing like cold stars. He whispered to the masked soldiers around him, "The prince is too strong now. The fire does not rule him anymore." One of the soldiers hissed, "What do we do?" The leader answered in a slow, deadly voice, "We break the human. Then the prince will break himself." He raised a thin hand, and from his cloak emerged a monstrous creature, twisted and sharp, with claws like black glass and wings that dripped darkness. The beast screeched and dove straight toward the battlefield, heading for Mark, not Corinne, because the Void Empire finally understood something. The human was the prince's heart. Mark didn't see the creature coming. He was helping a wounded soldier when Corinne suddenly roared louder than ever before, "Mark, move!" Mark turned, confused. The creature was already there, descending like a nightmare, its claws reaching for him. Mark stumbled backward, arms raised uselessly. But before the creature could strike, Corinne leapt in front of him with impossible speed. Fire burst from his throat in a protective blast, slamming the creature sideways into a stone pillar. Mark fell to the ground, gasping for breath, Okay. That thing wasn't in the job description. He muttered. Corinne didn't laugh, not this time. His eyes were filled with something deeper fear. Real fear. They want you, he said quietly. Because they know I will lose control if they take you. Mark sat up. Well, good thing you don't lose control anymore, right? Corinne didn't answer. His claws trembled, his wings shook. The fire beneath his skin flickered dangerously. Mark realized the truth. Corinne wasn't afraid of the monster. He was afraid of himself. Before Mark could speak, the Void Leader materialized from shadows. Tall and terrifying, Dragon Prince, he hissed. You have grown strong, but you are still a child clinging to a fragile creature, Corinne snarled. Stepping between Mark and the enemy, the leader smiled coldly. You will watch him fall. And then your fire will consume your kingdom. Mark stood up quickly. Don't listen to him, he whispered. You're stronger than this. The leader raised his hand. Commanding the shadow beast again, it lunged forward. Attacking Corinne with vicious speed, the prince fought fiercely. Flames slicing the air like bright swords, but the monster absorbed his fire. Drank it, twisted it, and spit it back in dark blasts. The ground shook as they clashed. Mark ran to help, but Corinne shouted, Stay back. Mark ignored him, of course, not happening. He yelled. Corinne unleashed a burst of fire that forced the monster away. But the Void Leader targeted Mark directly this time. A black spear of energy shot out from his hand. Rushing toward the human faster than lightning, Corinne saw it too late. No. He roared. He threw himself in front of Mark. Taking the full hit to his side, the blast tore through scales and muscle, sending Corinne crashing to the ground. A shocked gasp escaping him as pain shot through his body. Corinne! Mark screamed, running to him. The prince struggled to breathe. Fire leaking weakly from his wounded chest, Mark knelt beside him, shaking. Hey, stay with me. You're okay. You're okay. Corinne's eyes fluttered. Mark, run. Mark clenched his fists, furious. Not a chance. The Void Leader stepped.